Hello everyone, welcome to the video. So the most requested next video is about the top index funds in India. So in this video, I'm going to share the best index funds that you can invest in India and why index funds are actually the best way to invest in India's growth. I'm also going to share the exact portfolio designs that you can follow. These are example portfolio designs that I've already made for you. You can copy those portfolio designs and invest in the same proportions or adjust them based on your personal risk appetite, and I'll explain how to do that as well. And I'm also going to disclose the names of all of the index funds and the categories that we have picked those index funds from, as well as the metrics to be used when you are choosing this index fund. So we're going to do both. I'm going to teach you how to catch fish, and I'm also going to give you the fish. And towards the end of the video, I'll also share how I invest in these indices and my portfolio as well. So let's get started. There are three categories that we've picked up majorly, and there's a fourth bonus category as well. Okay, so the first one is Nifty, which is going to be Nifty 50. The second one is Next 50. The third one is mid cap, as you can see on my browser. And then the fourth bonus category is actually the US market. And this is an index that we keep for diversification. It may not be applicable to everyone, which is where the portfolio design would come in. And these are like different portfolios that I have designed, which I'm going to share the rationale behind why these portfolio designs and these portfolio splits could be very good to manage your portfolio, because portfolio management, portfolio design is a different skill, but you can actually learn it just by the examples that I will give you. So let's get started. First category of index funds in India is going to be the Nifty 50 category. Okay, and within Nifty 50 category, there are two funds. It's hard to pick a winner, but there are two of the best funds that I have here. You have the Navi Nifty 50 index fund and the ICICI Prudential Nifty 50 index fund. Full disclaimer, full disclosure, I actually do not have any sponsors. I do not have any financial relationships with any of these fund houses. So that's sad. But anyway, the point is that I like to share based on the metrics that we have. And if you look at all of the Nifty 50 index funds in India, you will find that they will be lacking in one of those metrics. So either they will have some exit load, or they will have a high expense ratio, which you do not want to pay, which is why you are choosing an index fund, right? So these have been picked based on those metrics, which I'll run through now. But the important thing to remember is that we are investing in India's growth. So what we are doing here is we are avoiding actively managed large cap mutual funds because they hardly beat the index. And instead of that, we are investing in the index directly, because index funds, what are index funds? Just as a recap, are funds that track the index. They don't try to beat the index by having an active fund manager. Instead of that, they just track the index by the algorithm. So the allocation of the index funds is basically going to be the same as the allocation of the index. So if there are 50 companies in Nifty 50, the first company holds 10%, then the mutual fund will hold 10%. If there is a company which goes out of the index, it will go out of the index fund. If a company enters the index, it's going to enter the index fund and so forth. You get the idea. Versus an actively managed large cap fund where someone is sitting, a fund manager is sitting and actually managing your portfolio. So getting back to the point, you do not need to look at the portfolio allocation when you're choosing an index fund. You do not need to look at the fund manager when you're choosing an index fund. And you hardly need to look at the AUM as well, as long as you have some sort of trust on the fund house and you know that this has been around. So now Navi 50 and ICICI Prudential, both of them are going to track the index. So what are the metrics that really matter? The most important metric becomes the expense ratio, because that's the reason we are not investing in actively managed fund, because we trust that India is going to grow as an economy. That's the first thing. The second thing we trust is that we need to get a lower expense ratio, which we think index funds are going to get for us. So that's why all of the other funds did not make it to the list. There is no third fund in this list because either the expense ratio is too high or they have an exit load, which I don't like about an index fund. For me, an index fund is something that should not have an exit load. It could be a personal opinion, but since most of my money is in Nifty 50, I would like to, be flexible and liquid with it. So these are the two funds. Now let's look at the metrics. You could literally invest in the Navi Nifty 50 index fund with 10 rupees, right? For ICICI Prudential, the minimum investment amount is 100 rupees, which is also not too bad. In terms of the dividend type, we are not looking at dividends. When we are investing in index funds, remember, we are picking the index funds which have the growth, not the dividend type of index funds, because that's the reason why we are investing, because we are following the growth of the Indian economy, right? Which is in the growth chart, growth trajectory, and it's bound to grow over the next decades. So in terms of returns, you really don't need to compare a lot because the returns are going to be same as the Nifty 50 returns since it's following the index. Like I said, there are not many metrics to consider here. Only thing you can note here is the launch date. Navi Nifty 50 is actually a newer fund. It was launched in 2021 while ICICI in 2023. So it's been around for a while. And then finally, the expense ratio, 0.06%, which is the lowest that you can get with Navi 50 and Navi Nifty 50. And with ICICI at 0.17%, slightly higher, but still pretty good. Fund managers don't really play a very important role here, so you can just completely ignore that. You don't have to research about their experience and what they've done over the past years, etc. So based on the expense ratio, I would pick the Navi Nifty 50, that would be my winner based on the expense ratio. Based on a combination of things like the age that has been around for a while and the expense ratio is also not that high, I might also consider ICICI. So those will be the two picks for the Navi and the ICICI for the Nifty 50 index fund. ठीक है, तो अब हम दूसरे कैटेगरी पे चलते हैं. ये हमारा Nifty 50 हो गया. You can pick any इंडेक्स फंड, टू बी वेरी ऑनेस्ट. आप किसी भी निफ्टी 50 इंडेक्स फंड को पिक करो, आप सर्च करो एंड आप देखो कि उसका एक्सपेंस रेशियो कितना है, उसका कोई एग्जिट लोड तो नहीं है एंड वो कितने टाइम से है. एंड आई थिंक दोज शुड बी लाइक इनफ फॉर यू टू डिसाइड विच इंडेक्स फंड. बेस्ड ऑन दैट आई हैव गॉट यू दीज टू. ठीक है, सो दैट्स हाउ इफ यू वांट टू कैच योर ओन फिश यू कैन सर्च, just search for mutual funds, search for any just search for the keyword Nifty 50 index fund, click on any of these, don't go for the dividend ones. You'll see expense ratio बहुत ज़्यादा है तो मुझे नहीं. अब जो मुझे 0.06% पे मिल रहा है एंड यहाँ पे मुझे 5,000 रुपये से शुरू करना पड़ेगा, why should I go for this fund, right? So those are the things. Returns are going to be the same as Nifty 50. Pick any other. This is a fund plan. This is slightly different, but let's pick this UTI Nifty 50, right? 0.35%. Why should I go for a 0.35% to eventually just invest in the same index, right? So those are the things that you can consider if you want to do your own research, which you should, right? Full disclaimer, I'm not a financial advisor and you should do your own research before you invest. ठीक है, तो ये तो हो गया, इसको हम क्लोज कर देते हैं. अब हम आते हैं नेक्स्ट 50 पे. तो अगेन Navi is making to the list, not because I have any relationship with this, it's just that they have the lowest expense ratio. It's hard for me to ignore something with an expense ratio of 0.12. So next category is going to be next 50. You've invested in the top 50 companies of India through the first index fund. Now you're covering the next 50 companies. So the 51st to the 100th company in the country. If a company leaves this list, they're going to leave the index fund. अगर कोई नई company आती है, it's going to enter the fund. So it's going to be managed automatically according to the allocation in the index. Remember, index fund, we are just tracking the index. We're not trying to beat the index. I use the word trying because actively managed funds find it hard to beat the index. So for a long term, our philosophy is कि नेक्स्ट 50 कंपनीज में हम इन्वेस्ट कर रहे हैं बिकॉज इनके पास थोड़ा सा शायद ज़्यादा ग्रोथ पोटेंशियल हो कंपेयर टू द फर्स्ट 50 कंपनीज. सो इट्स गुड टू पुट योर मनी हियर एज द सेकेंड कैटेगरी. सो विद इन दिस कैटेगरी अगेन Navi and ICICI come up to be the winners. Low expense ratio, no exit load, very low minimum investment amounts. Also, you can do some more research if you want to also see additional metrics like tracking error, etc. आप ticker tape पे ये डाल सकते हो and do some more research. You'll typically find that these two funds are beating all of the other funds in the next 50 category as well for most of these metrics. And if you want to pick any one of these, उसके बाद आप क्या कर सकते हो, you can click on compare just like I showed you in the previous video and then add the Navi one so you can compare both of those funds and see how they are different. ठीक है, so इसमें again हमारे पास same दो winners आ जाते हैं. So now your job is to pick any one of the next 50. So now you have the 50, इसको close कर देते हैं. You have the next 50. Now we come to the third category which is the mid cap 150. तो हम क्या करें, हम पोर्टफोलियो डिज़ाइन करेंगे एंड में, बट हमने टॉप 50 कंपनीज में एक फंड चूज़ कर लिया, फिर हमने 51st to 100th कंपनी में एक फंड चूज़ कर लिया. अब हम 101 से लेके जो 250 है इन कंपनीज के लिए एक फंड चूज करें विच इज़ अवर मिड कैप इंडेक्स, राइट? सो दैट्स द थर्ड कैटेगरी. सो इवेंचुअली व्हाट यू आर डूइंग इज यू आर इन्वेस्टिंग इन द टॉप 250 कंपनीज इन इंडिया फ्रॉम लार्ज कैप अंटिल मिड कैप through these index funds. ठीक है, एंड में आपको ये भी बताऊंगा कि स्मॉल कैप के लिए हम क्यों नहीं पिक कर रहे हैं इंडेक्स फंड, बट अभी तक इतना हमको क्लियर हो गया है कि हमारा थर्ड कैटेगरी जो आ जाता है, विच इज़ गोइंग टू बी द थर्ड वन, इज गोइंग टू बी मिड कैप 150. नाउ just based on data, again, somehow Navi and ICICI make it to the top. Expense ratio 0.11%, minimum investment 10 rupees. Allocation is going to be same as the mid cap index, so there's not much to see here. उसके बाद आपके पास ICICI का आप देख सकते हो 1 year return 49.28% है, ICICI Prudential में 49.31% है, exit load 0, expense ratio is very low 0.2, minimum investment is 100 rupees. So pretty solid. Both of these, you could take your pick. You could also, see others, and I've told you how to compare. And documents definitely पढ़ लेना before you invest, because ये जो आपको information मिल रही है ये सिर्फ basic details हैं, which are मेरे हिसाब से enough to make a decision. I don't read all the documents, but I do scan through it, and sometimes I use Google Bard or ChatGPT to summarize the documents. But mostly these metrics matter the most, and I'm a person who would be like कि कौन सी metric सबसे ज़्यादा matter करती है उस पर focus करो, especially when you're looking at index funds. अगर यही actively managed funds होते तो शायद हमको बहुत सारी और चीज़ें देखनी पड़ती, the portfolio, the fund manager's background, ये वो. But right now we are relying on the fund house to be able to basically just track the index, so there's not much to do. So that's going to be the 2 picks for mid cap 150. अब आपने ये 3 चूज तो कर लिया, अब आप अपना पोर्टफोलियो कैसे डिज़ाइन करोगे, राइट? सो लेट्स, बिफोर वी गो टू द 4th कैटेगरी, लेट्स गो टू द पोर्टफोलियो डिज़ाइन, एंड आई एम गोना शो यू वन पोर्टफोलियो डिज़ाइन नाउ, सो दैट यू अंडरस्टैंड हाउ to manage and allocate funds in a portfolio. This is a very simple and straightforward portfolio design. तो हमने अपने निफ्टी 50 कैटेगरी में एक फंड पिक कर लिया, नेक्स्ट 50 कैटेगरी में एक फंड पिक कर लिया, एंड फाइनली मिड कैप 150 में एक फंड पिक कर लिया. नाउ द ओनली थिंग यू नीड टू असाइन टू द फंड इज अ परसेंटेज, एंड दैट इज द परसेंटेज बेस्ड ऑन how much money you are going to put into your SIP. Now the biggest reason to choose an index fund is that you can automate your investing, जिससे कि आपका पैसा जाता रहे, सालों सालों जाता रहे, तभी आपको जो मोटा रिटर्न है वो एंड में दिखेगा. चाहे आप 1000 रुपये से शुरू कर रहे हो, 5000, 10,000, उससे फ़र्क नहीं पड़ता, ठीक है? सो लेट्स से फॉर एग्जांपल इन दिस केस आप 100 रुपये से भी शुरू करो, या 1000 रुपये या 10,000 रुपये से शुरू करो, ऐसा कोई भी आप नंबर अपने हिसाब से ले लो. सो लेट्स से फॉर एग्जांपल यू आर इन योर 20s and you are busy with your work, you are hustling, you're probably also doing some side project or freelancing. नहीं कर रहे हो तो अच्छी चीज़ है करना, you can discover that because you can increase your income, which is going to be the best way to grow your portfolio. But if you're doing any of those things, then you may not be interested in wasting too much time in managing your portfolio, or looking at individual stocks is the worst thing, of course, but even looking at the funds every time. All you have to do is, सबसे अच्छी बात इंडेक्स फंड्स की कि आपको एक बार रिसर्च करनी है. ऐसे वीडियोस जो ये वीडियो है, ऐसा वीडियो अगर आपको कोई मिल जाए जो आप एक बार देख लो, पोर्टफोलियो बना लो, फिर सेट इट एंड फॉरगेट इट टाइप का इन्वेस्टिंग है ये. मतलब इफ आई कुड हेल्प समवन, इवन वन पर्सन, लुक एट दिस वीडियो, अंडरस्टैंड, डिजाइन देयर पोर्टफोलियो, लीव इट फॉर 10 years, they will come back to me and they will be rich. That's what I can promise, right? So let's say for example 10,000 rupees आपके पास है. So what you could do is, if you want to play it safe, you want to focus on your job, your life, maybe you're about to get married, just got married, or about to have children, or already have children. So what you want to do is, you want to put half of that money in Nifty 50 index fund. तो 10,000 रुपये में से हमने 5,000 रुपये Nifty 50 में डाल दिए. अगर आपको कोई बोलता है कि टॉप 50 कंपनीज इंडिया की बहुत ग्रो हो चुकी हैं, इसके बाद ग्रो नहीं होंगी, तो उनको पास डेटा दिखाओ. ऐसा इंसान हर बार बोल सकता है, राइट? सो दे कैन से दिस एट एनी गिवन पॉइंट इन द पास्ट एज वेल. इफ यू वॉच इंटरव्यूज ऑफ पीपल टॉकिंग अबाउट फंड्स, there have been many times in the past years where people have said इससे ज़्यादा growth नहीं है वहाँ पे, right? Or they have a recent rally, now it will not grow. So that point I don't buy. I think in the long term, all these things will grow in India as India will grow, ठीक है? So Nifty 50 index fund में आपने 5,000 रुपये डाल दिए, 3,000 रुपये आपने नेक्स्ट 50 में डाल दिए, बिकॉज यू आर ऑल्सो कैप्चरिंग द ग्रोथ ऑफ दीज कंपनीज बिकमिंग बिग. अब मान लो कोई कंपनी निफ्टी नेक्स्ट 50 में इतनी बड़ी हो गई कि वो निफ्टी 50 में आ गई, तो आपको उसका 2 बार बेनिफिट मिल जाएगा. एक बार तो इस 3,000 रुपये से 3,000 रुपीज़ विल ग्रो विद दैट कंपनी, देन इट विल कम टू निफ्टी 50, सो योर 5,000 रुपीज़ विल ऑल्सो ग्रो, ठीक है ना? अगर कोई निफ्टी 50 से निकल के नेक्स्ट 50 में आ गई, तो भी आपका पैसा वहाँ पे भी है, वहाँ पे भी है, राइट? सो व्हाट आई मीन इज, यू हैव दिस सेकेंड थिंग वेयर इट्स लाइक, अगर आप सिर्फ निफ्टी 50 में, इफ यू वर टू डू अ वन फंड पोर्टफोलियो, then obviously I would say don't do anything except Nifty 50. आप Nifty 50 में सारा पैसा लगा दो अपना 10,000 रुपये, that's your one fund portfolio. But ये 3 फंड से आपको ये एडवांटेज मिल जा रहा है, right? Which is why I am recommending these 3 funds. And mid cap से आपको ये एडवांटेज मिल रहा है, like these are companies which could become the biggest companies in India in the future. So 20% or 2,000 rupees is now going there. So 10,000 rupees का आपको SIP करना है तो आप 5,000 रुपये निफ्टी 50 इंडेक्स फंड में डाल दो. You could choose any of the funds. उसके बाद आप 3,000 रुपये नेक्स्ट 50 में डाल दो और 2,000 रुपये मिड कैप 150 में डाल दो. दिस विल बी अ गुड सेट एंड फॉरगेट पोर्टफोलियो दैट विल सर्व यू फॉर अ वेरी लॉन्ग पीरियड ऑफ टाइम एंड यू वोंट रियली हैव टू डू एनीथिंग. एंड उसके बाद आप ऐसे वीडियोस और ये फाइनेंशियल यूट्यूबर्स और इन सबको देखना बंद कर सकते हो. एंड उससे ये फ़ायदा होगा कि यू विल स्टॉप सीइंग दीज थिंग्स ऑन देयर फीड. इंस्टेड ऑफ दैट यू कैन इंप्रूव एट योर स्किल. जो भी आप करते हो, जैसे मैं डिजिटल मार्केटिंग बैकग्राउंड से हूँ तो मैं उस पर फोकस कर सकता हूँ रादर देन फोकसिंग ऑन एवरी टाइम सीइंग ये स्टॉक कैसा कर रहा है, ये कंपनी कैसी कर रही है. So this sort of portfolio is really good to set and forget and unsubscribe to all these YouTube channels. The second one is if you want to diversify, including mine. But मैं शायद पूरी ज़िंदगी पर same चीज़ ना बोलूँ, and I might be educational, making some educational videos about other topics as well. So I'll be happy and honored if you keep the subscription. Portfolio 2 would be और अगर आपने नहीं किया है सब्सक्राइब तो प्लीज़ कर लेना. पोर्टफोलियो 2 निफ्टी 50 पे 40% एंड जो हमारा 10% यहाँ से हमने हटा के यूएस इंडेक्स में डाल दिया है. नाउ दिस इज द बोनस फंड दैट आई वाज टेलिंग यू, द 4th कैटेगरी ऑफ बोनस फंड. बिफोर वी गो टू पोर्टफोलियो 3, नाउ वी गोना जंप बैक. आई नो थोड़ा इधर उधर है इस वीडियो में, बट इट्स इंपॉर्टेंट बिकॉज आई एम ट्राइंग टू कनेक्ट द डॉट्स फॉर यू. तो ये 50% पूरा इंडिया के लार्ज कैप की जगह हमने क्या किया है कि यार 40% इंडिया में डालो, 10% यूएस में डालो. सो इट्स अ गुड डाइवर्सिफिकेशन. तो यूएस के लिए कौन सा फंड चूज करना है? अगेन समहाउ this Navi thing keeps coming because of the low expense ratio, 0.13%. You also have ICICI Prudential Nasdaq 100 fund, but expense ratio of 0.5%. You have Motilal Oswal ka Nasdaq 100 fund of fund, which is 0.18%. And finally, you have Motilal Oswal ka S&P 500 index fund, 0.56%. Now, what is the difference between the index fund and the fund of fund? हम लोग अभी तक तो index fund की बात कर रहे थे, अब सडनली ये fund of fund कहाँ से आ गया? तो इसका कॉन्सेप्ट ये होता है कि जो फंड ऑफ फंड है वो एक्चुअली यूएस के किसी इंडेक्स फंड में इन्वेस्ट कर रहा है बेसिकली, या यूएस के किसी ईटीएफ में इन्वेस्ट कर रहा है. मोस्ट लाइकली जो यूएस का इंडेक्स फंड है जो नैस्डैक 100 को ट्रैक करता है उसमें ये पैसा लगा रहा है. बट यहाँ पे जो इंडेक्स फंड है उसमें आईसीआईसीआई खुद बैठ के नैस्डैक 100, आईसीआईसीआई का एल्गोरिथम खुद Nasdaq 100 में इन्वेस्ट करा है. दैट इज द ओनली डिफरेंस हियर. एंड यू कैन सी हियर इफ यू गो टू द एलोकेशन कि जो Navi का Nasdaq 100 फंड है दैट इज एक्चुअली पुटिंग द मनी इन द Invesco का Nasdaq 100 ETF. सो लाइक आई सेड ईदर एन ETF और इंडेक्स फंड. तो Invesco जो यूएस की कंपनी है, जो यूएस का ETF है, उसमें ये अपना पैसा लगा दे रहा है ना. वैसे ही यहाँ पे जो ICICI Prudential है, अगर आप इसमें पोर्टफोलियो देखोगे तो आप देखोगे कि डायरेक्टली उन कंपनीज में पैसा लगा रहा है जस्ट बेस्ड ऑन द Nasdaq 100 पोर्टफोलियो. ठीक है. तो इसमें कभी कभी लोगों को कन्फ्यूजन हो सकता है कि ये जो एक्सपेंस रेशियो है ना, इसको आपको ज़रूर स्टडी करना चाहिए फंड डॉक्यूमेंट में. ये जो एक्सपेंस रेशियो अगर आप यहाँ पे रीड करोगे जीरो था, जस्ट गोना गिव यू वेरी प्लेन वनीला इन्फॉर्मेशन दैट दिस इज व्हाट द एक्सपेंस रेशियो इज. बट इन केस ऑफ फंड यू रियली हैव टू मेक श्योर इज द एक्सपेंस रेशियो ऑफ दिस फंड प्लस यू आर ऑल्सो गोइंग टू पे एन एडिशनल एक्सपेंस रेशियो of this fund or not. That information you'll get in the document. This is where the reading document is actually useful. And यहाँ पे क्या है, it's going to be very straightforward. Of course, I've opened the wrong page. You should open the growth one, not the dividend one. But if you look at this index fund, you are very sure that this expense ratio is actually 0.5% that you're paying directly to ICICI Prudential, and there's no additional expense ratio involved. But in case of the Navi fund of fund or any fund of fund, you should be careful about is there an expense ratio additional expense ratio associated with the Invesco ETF or not, right? Similarly with Motilal Oswal, you have two options, S&P 500 and Nasdaq 100. Again, fund of fund, you have to be careful. Even though it shows 0.18%, does it include or not the expense ratio of the ETF of Motilal Oswal? So it's then putting the money in its own ETF. And which is where I put my money in, which I'm going to show you in my portfolio. How I invest in Nasdaq 100 is through Motilal ka ETF. And then finally the S&P 500. Final point, should you choose NASDAQ 100 or S&P 500? Honestly, with this kind of portfolio design, it doesn't matter. I know you don't want to hear this, you want one answer, but it doesn't matter. If 1,000 rupees out of your 10,000 rupees are going to go in the US, out of which the NASDAQ 100 companies and S&P 500 are not going to be very, very different. Of course, it sounds like here you are investing in 500 companies, but with NASDAQ, you are only investing in 100 companies. But in any index, the top companies are going to take a lot of the portfolio, right? So S&P 500 index fund, let's open that, let's see, and let's compare it with a NASDAQ 100 fund. Apple is taking 9.21%. In case of S&P, it's taking almost 7%. Microsoft is taking 8.6% in NASDAQ. In case of S&P, it's taking almost 7%. Then you have Amazon taking 4.83%. Then you have Amazon taking. So you can already see that, you know, there is so much overlap here. It's just that NASDAQ is going to be way more tech heavy. And in case tech is down in the US at that time, you'll see some sort of volatility in your portfolio. But otherwise, as per me, unless you are over optimizing your portfolio, it doesn't matter which one you pick. Whether you pick NASDAQ or if you were in the US, if you were majorly investing in the US, it would matter, right? So for example, in India, if you say Nifty 50 or Nifty 100, ek hi baat hai, it's not, because your money is going to go, if you invest in next 50 separately, your money is going to be more allocated towards next 50 versus if you were to just invest in Nifty 100, because the top companies are going to take most of the allocation, right? Which is where the portfolio 3 comes in. If you wanted to tap on potential growth, then you would design your portfolio slightly differently. तो अभी तक तो हम क्या कर रहे थे, हम ज़्यादातर Nifty 50 में डाल रहे थे, but now we're going to turn things around, right? So this is going to be fun, because what we're doing now is we're saying Nifty 50 पे 20%, next 50 पे 30%, because these companies have more growth potential, and mid cap 150 index पे 50%, because these have way more growth potential. So this is for a person who is willing to take slightly more risk than the person who's putting their money in portfolio one, who's also, you know, willing to probably this kind of person will also have some actively managed small cap funds, which is the last part that I wanted to cover in this video. That for small cap companies, I do not personally recommend buying the index. I recommend looking at small cap actively managed mutual funds and buying the best ones. And there is a video that I've made, which would be a great next video to watch. The top 3 small cap mutual funds, either actively managed mutual funds that you can put your money when it comes to diversification to small cap. So that's all for this video. Hope I've covered everything. I know there is a lot of information. Feel free to go back and watch this video again, because once you design your portfolio with something like this, you can actually set it and forget it. And that will be good for your long-term wealth building journey. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.